Hey, friends, welcome back to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Michael Carey, your host, and I have a special guest today, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and I feel like it's long overdue. Daryl Brazel, he is a pastor of New Hope Church, founder of New Hope Recovery. He's an author and a speaker. And Daryl, I've just heard about you for so many years, and I'm like, man, I need to talk to Daryl. I need to call Daryl. I'd love to meet Daryl. And you're so many miles away, but I feel like you're a brother, and I could just have coffee with you, weekly, and we'd have so much stuff to talk about. And so I'm excited to just have this time where we get to talk and have all these folks listen in on our conversation. So welcome.
Good to be here. As long as I don't have to drink coffee, we'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, I do. I have my coffee right here next to me, and so I'm good.
I honor that. It's one of those places where, yeah, I'm a coffee wimp. I've thrown away a hot chocolate before because I stirred it with a spoon somebody stirred coffee with. So I love the smell of it, but I'm not a coffee person. So,
There you go. Right on. Well, yeah, the different pieces of our questions here that we planned and we talked about and prayed over and stuff. I'd love to just first start off by asking you a little bit about yourself. What was the process like for you getting into this sector of ministry to find to be the founder of this recovery program and the groups that you run and the stuff that you've written? How did you get there?
well, it really goes back to, even my days in high school, college. I knew in high school that I was called to ministry. But I always had this struggle with pornography and sexual issues in my background. And so I had this conflict of, well, I'm called to ministry, but I've got this big secret, went through college and graduate school and never opened up about it to anyone. Always thought, okay, if I could work harder, if I can do more Bible study, if I can do my prayer list, if I can be more disciplined, et cetera, et cetera. And it wouldn't happen. And so part of my journey was that there was never, growing up in the church, growing up with, I think, a pretty good, clear understanding of Jesus' teaching. If a man looks at a woman lustfully in his heart, he's committed adultery. There was never a day in my life that I looked at pornography that I didn't know it was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't find a way out.
Yeah.
So, especially early in my ministry, my radar was always on listening, looking for anyone that would offer me hope and a way out. And so in February of 2000, I was actually attending a minister's retreat, and a pastor told his story and his journey. And it was that was my beginning place. That's when I opened up. That's when I shared with him. And it was a small retreat setting and a number of other ministers. And out of that, that's where my recovery began. And so out of that, I knew that first night, I knew that God was calling me at some point when I was ready to be that same voice, to be a voice for
Wow.
others that says, I've been there. This was how it was destroying me, and God has shown me a way out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has kind of been the real core going all the way back to February of 2000, where I knew that God was calling me to be a voice in the desert, crying out and saying, you don't have to live this way. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
proof that you don't have to live this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so out of that,
Yeah.
I spent the first year really just trying to survive by the skin of my teeth and not go back into my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, I had one individual that I was meeting with, but it was more he and I were locking arms trying to find our way out of the rat's nest. And then in year two, early in 2001, I opened it up. We started our first group. I put an announcement in our bulletin that if anyone's struggling with this, see me, and we're going to start a group. And so I think it was April of 2001. We had 5 guys show up for our first meeting, and we met in the basement of the church, and told our stories. And one of them never came back. And then over the next year, God continued to add a few more men and a few more men. And so that was my beginning. And that met with a lot of conflict in my church setting. The church I worked for at the time didn't really want any part of it. They liked the idea in principle, but they didn't want to be known as that church. Actually, if you want the actual term, they said they didn't want to be known as the pervert church.
Wow. Wow.
So that over time, with my leadership at odds, led me in the summer of 2003 to resign from that church. And I started looking for a church that I could work for as a recovery minister, a men's minister. And how do I put it? The response I got was pretty much crickets. Back at that day, it was still, we don't talk about that. I had one church down in someplace in Oklahoma, it may have been Tulsa, one pastor who knew the need and was interested, but he couldn't, it never went beyond a couple conversations. In the meantime, God just kept putting some strange circumstances in front of us, saying, okay, Daryl, I want you to start a church there in Lawrence based upon recovery. And I resisted. I fought. I said, there's no way I can do that, in the sense of drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, choose me or choose my leaders. I just could not do that ethically. And then the strangest things happened. The individual who was helping me with the group showed up at my house on a Sunday night. He was still part of the church that I'd resigned from. And he said, well, they did it. And I'm like, they did what? He said, they made the decision to disband and disperse. Just blew me away that they would make that decision. It was a viable church of, 75 people on Sundays. They had $100,000 in a building fund. They owned some land south of town. They were really in a pretty good position. But my kind of standard line is, when you tell God no, strange things happen. Because I think God was calling them to move into this ministry, move forward in a number of different areas. But it didn't meet what they knew. So when my friend told me that, I didn't hear an audible voice, but I pretty much kind of heard God kind of chuckle and say, okay, Daryl, now what's your excuse? Because I'd already been offered the same building. In fact, the very building that I'm in now, I'd been offered it by the building owner, rent free for 6 months if I started a church. And I told him, no, I can't do that. So that led to January of 2004, we started New Hope Fellowship Church with the dream and vision of growing a church to support a recovery ministry. And here we are 18 years later, and it's really the other way around. The demand and the need for the recovery ministry has taken, the majority of my time, energy, etc. So New Hope Church has stayed very small. We're pretty much a house church with a building. But the building then is meeting the needs of our groups and the counseling and individual and couples work I do with people, and the work my wife does with her ladies. And so that's that's a very, very short version of a long, crazy God story. That we still don't fully understand. But we're still here, and we've been running. Like I said, I've had a continuous men's group, multiple men's groups now here in this building since March or April of 2001.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. What a journey. Yeah.
It has been a
Fantastic.
journey.
Hmm.
And we've used a number of different materials. You know, we started off with Ted Roberts' Pure Desire book and materials, and
Hmm.
then we've used, Mark Laser's stuff. We've used
Yeah.
a little bit from a whole bunch of different perspectives, and then about 15 years ago, I just had a sense that God was saying, okay, Daryl, I want you to take what you've learned from all these other sources. Because, my groups really morphed into, we weren't really using one book. We were using different things that I had pulled together.
Yep.
And so out of that, felt a calling to start writing the manual that I now have as New Hope for Sexual Integrity. And that has been the foundation of our groups for about the last, I think 10, 12, now probably more like 13, 14 years.
Hmm.
Though it's constantly under revision because I keep learning
Yeah.
new stuff. And
Right.
in fact, I've done a lot of work in the last couple years, especially around betrayal trauma and deeper understanding of what the wives are going through.
Yeah.
And so I've already added a significant chapter, and then gone back through and done a rewrite in many respects of a lot of things. But I have one more chapter that I'm dying to add, and I'm hoping in a couple weeks, 2.5 weeks, I'm headed to Colorado for an archery elk hunt, and I'll take my laptop with me on the mountain. And in the middle of the day, I'm hoping to crank out that last chapter for this significant rewrite, because I haven't
Yeah.
printed any paper manuals in a year now because I knew
Hmm.
I needed to get this finished.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
that's kind of the nuts, a skim version of the journey of how I've gotten to where I'm at.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that fantastic story and for being vulnerable, talking about what happens when we say no to God, we say yes to God, we say maybe, I mean, that's, isn't that the journey that everybody has? I mean, so many people, we have to, it's just that, that relationship, navigating that relationship with Him, and we get to see how He responds in all of those cases. And yeah, it's fascinating, the different chapters of ministry. And yeah, you're bringing back so many memories of my own journey too. And that started in '09, February of '09. So just a
Hmm.
few years later in February,
Sure.
you said February of 2000, right? Um, and yeah, the idea of using multiple different resources and then starting to write our own material, and just because of those same things, pulling in so many different pieces. It's like, I like I like the idea of having something that's that we can modify, something that's
Hmm.
moldable, and an open document, an open, you know, plane where we can just invite God to continue to teach us and grow us, and then we pass that on to the people that we minister to. That's beautiful. So
Well, and that was the interesting thing for me too, is when I started writing, I thought I was, kind of doing a research paper, bringing in all these other resources and put it in one document.
mm,
Then what I was really surprised at is that I, more than half of what I've written really didn't come out of materials that we used, but came out of the experience of walking beside people in their journey.
right.
That so much of what I've written in my
Yeah.
manual is really learned organically
Hmm.
by what worked and
Hmm.
what helped and
Yeah.
what didn't. And
Yeah.
then what God has shown us as we have, I call this messy ministry.
Hmm.
It's not the pretty everybody on Sunday morning in their Sunday best. It's being down in the gutter and the muck and the mess,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
seeing from them the pain and the struggle, and then the beauty of God meeting them in those places. And
Yeah.
so much of my manual really came out from that perspective of this is how we've seen God
Mm.
meet with, join, walk alongside, and bring healing for broken and wounded people, ourselves included.
Right. Right. As it should be, right?
Hmm.
Ministering from our own personal experience and journey of well, how God has grown us, or ministering to people what we learn. And so yeah, some another question we didn't talk about that just came to mind. So just the perspective of being a pastor, talking to pastors, inviting the church to embrace a recovery ministry. When you think about, I was just thinking about the pastors, the youth pastors, lead pastors, all of the audience here that are listening today. What I mean, why do you think a pastor would say no, or would say maybe, or whatever the case is just to be resistant to inviting this kind of thing and ministering to the people in their church, especially with parachurch ministry or something outside of their walls, and inviting that in? Why do you think he would say, or she would say no to that?
Well, I think there's many reasons. Best case scenario is, I think many, some in ministry are in denial still. They think, oh, well, our people don't struggle this way, or etc. For many, that's best case scenario is just
Mm-hmm.
naivete or obliviousness.
Yeah.
Then you start moving down a scale, and the next step is fear.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mentioned pornography from the pulpit one time, and I got reamed by 4 different mothers who said, how dare you introduce that term to my kids?
Mm.
So there is a fear. This is a scary, difficult subject.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, unfortunately, you get further down that continuum of, I think problematic of why it's such an issue for the church is, unfortunately, it's a problem because so many church leaders do not want light shined on this subject because they've got their own secret basement,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got their own secrets that they're hiding. And so the last thing that they want is any attention drawn to this, because then they run the risk of exposure, or are forced to say, okay, I've got to deal with this myself.
Yeah.
For example, I cannot tell you how many times someone has gotten a hold of my material, or listened to some of my teaching, or gotten one of my videos and said, oh, we want to have you to our church. We want you to come to a seminar.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember probably 15 years ago, we had some people in Hawaii, and they wanted my wife and I to come out. They were going to put us up. They were going to give us a few days to enjoy the island.
Oh,
Oh, it was,
what a
I was
terrible
like,
invitation,
yeah,
though.
just a
That's
horrible invitation. And we were excited about it. And, they were working up, we had dates, we had an outline, we had everything going. And we were right up to the point, the church leadership was on board. They said, yeah, we need this. This is a huge issue. We got right up to the point of ready to order the airline tickets.
hmm.
And then I got an email from them saying, leadership is pulling the plug. This is too scary for them.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so, what I will tell you is, I can't tell you how many times churches, I've had someone from a church contact me. We've been in conversations. And right before we get to the point of spending the money, of buying the plane tickets, making the
Hmm.
commitment, yeah, this is absolutely going to happen, somebody in leadership gets cold feet, pulls the plug, because this is too hot of a potato for us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say that I think a big portion of that, a lot of it is just fear,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think oftentimes it is a combination. Well, first of all, the enemy does not want this talked about.
Right.
The enemy would much prefer to work in darkness, and
Hmm.
so he works really hard keeping it in the dark.
Yeah.
And so the enemy, I tell people, okay, if you want to have me come, you need to be prepared for opposition. And
Hmm.
that people nod their heads, say, yeah, it's important. We see the need for it. And you
Hmm.
need to be prepared. At some point, somebody's going to subtly pull up that, well, what about this? Or do we really have the funds? Or,
Hmm. Hmm.
mhm.
Yeah.
And, the
Hmm.
statistics, I'm sure, Michael.
Hmm.
70% of men in most, in churches are looking at porn during the week.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the anonymous
And
survey that Barna did and all that.
yeah, and
And
and and that's been my experience too,
hmm.
talking to, uh, individuals and even pastors, and the pastors are not immune to this.
No,
In
no, no,
fact,
no.
pastors are incredibly vulnerable to it because of many factors.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so from that, there is great fear of addressing it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the patriarchy in our churches also magnifies this.
Hmm.
Um, and and that's done a great disservice and a great harm to, or it's perpetuated great harm and abuse toward the women in our churches, because there are
Hmm.
so many suffering wives who are afraid to speak up because they're afraid that they will be that well, they're first of all afraid that would be, telling their husband's dirty laundry, or they would be an unsubmissive
Hmm.
wife, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and part of that perpetuation is because of how few churches are willing to address it.
Hmm.
Or if it is addressed in very shallow ways of, well, porn's bad, don't do it.
Hmm. Yeah. That's not helpful. No.
It's not helpful.
I think we already knew that, Daryl, when we were looking at porn years ago, didn't we? Like, it's
Like
bad,
I
don't do
said,
it. You
there
said
was
it.
there was never a day in my life that I looked at
Hmm.
porn that I didn't know it was wrong.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
I didn't understand what it was doing for me. I didn't
Hmm.
understand the deep hurts that it was addressing. I didn't understand that it was my learned way to escape the reality in which I lived.
Hmm. Yeah.
I didn't understand how much of it had been almost passed down to me on a DNA level from previous
Hmm.
generations. I
Yeah,
didn't understand
exactly.
that getting out of it would be the hardest and best thing I would ever do in my life.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. Well said. And yeah, it's the same, for the pastor that's struggling too out there that's listening right now. You know, he's doing the same, using it to cope with so many different things. There could be a lot of loneliness in leadership, and the all the output and how exhausting it can be
Mm-hmm.
to do that and to have that role and that responsibility and preparing messages, whatever it is, and all the stressors. He's doing the same thing, and understanding and learning that where does it really
Well,
come from is so vital.
yeah, and even bigger than that though is just, um, pastors come from the same backgrounds that all of us come back from.
Mm-hmm.
Pastors do not come from, uh, you know, very extremely healthy, loving, well-attached families.
Right.
We came into ministry with our brokenness.
Yeah. And
And
a
for
lot of
many, and myself included, even part of my sense of calling into ministry was a desperate attempt to run away from this struggle.
Hmm.
I
Oh,
can
wow.
remember even high school and college thinking, well, surely when I'm fully devoted to God and spending all my time working in ministry, then this struggle will go away. This will subside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Right. The lies and deception are pretty thick. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I pray that that's helpful, and I know that you and I both would love to take a phone call, talk to a pastor confidentially, and help him out, build that pathway out. What does that look like? But
Mhm.
the fear, is so strong, and the deception of the enemy. I mean, yeah, just
Absolutely.
you spelled it out so well, and those are the ingredients that keep people under oppression, and we think that we live in denial, and those are some of the questions I was going to ask you about. Some of the writing that you've done on denial, we
Sure,
think
but
that we're going to be
can
able to
I
get out ourselves.
can I touch on something else though in regard to
Yeah.
pastors?
Oh yeah.
What's really terrifying, even more terrifying than the place the pastor is in, is the place his wife is in.
Mm, yeah.
The pastor's wife who has some inkling.
Mm-hmm.
She has some fear that, yeah, I see the signs, or I've noticed a few things in a history, or our sexual relationship is painful, it's always conflictual, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe he doesn't pursue me at all.
Right.
Both extremes are there. Some
Mm-hmm.
men in sexual addiction, then they pursue their wife and they use their wife as part of their acting out. Some men in sexual addiction basically get their needs, desires met elsewhere, so they don't pursue their wife. There's both, and
Yeah.
both wives are in incredible pain from that.
Right.
And so, one of the most lonely, painful places in the world is the pastor's wife, the minister's wife of a sexually addicted man,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
because it's hard enough for a woman to know who to turn to. Period.
Right.
But if you're the wife of someone in ministry, who do I talk to? Because even just raising the question could cost my husband his job, could cost our family our financial security.
Mm. Yeah.
It's an
Yeah.
incredibly terrifying and lonely place.
And the embarrassment, the public exposure.
Well, and as you
Yeah.
know from working with your wife, the vast majority of wives, even when they discover their husbands struggle, even when intellectually they may understand, no, this isn't about me, this is about his choices, this is about his background, this is about how he was harmed and
Mm-hmm.
how he's managing that harm. The vast majority of wives still wrestle with those lies in their own head that the enemy puts of, well, you weren't enough, or you were
Right.
too much,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's your fault.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
Yeah.
those lies, especially for a minister's wife, the wife of someone in ministry, just are leave them incredibly paralyzed.
Mm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So true. That is so true. So it's another factor of tremendous fear, and gosh, that's terrible to have to live under that kind of oppression, from fear,
Sure.
from the enemy, the lies. Gosh. Yeah. So true. um and we see a lot of, I should say, obviously not enough, but we see many pastors and
Mm-hmm.
their spouse and stuff coming into the ministry and receiving that. And I just want to say that so many times I think the things that we're afraid of, most of it doesn't happen. Some of it
Right.
might, yeah, some of it does, but I mean, the things that the enemy tricks us into believing that's going to happen if we expose this and bring it out into the light,
Hmm.
most of it doesn't ever
Most
really
of it
take
doesn't
place.
happen, but in the moment, the most important thing is what I think's going to happen.
Right,
That
right,
is
right.
the driving force.
Yeah.
What I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid is going to happen, the fear center of our brain is level 2 of our brain. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
level 1 is attachment, and very close next to it is our amygdala, is our fear center.
Yeah.
And so when our fear center kicks in, it takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And what we are most afraid of controls so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why so many times, and I've seen this, heard the stories, and guys say if she knew everything, she would divorce me. And
Hmm.
uh, honestly, yes, there are for sure divorces that take place. But I have seen some really remarkable stories of reconciliation, and that doesn't always happen. And as a matter of fact, with the guy that actually presses into recovery and actually does change and grow, I mean, women have this incredible capacity to be able to work through that and forgive that I don't fully understand myself how they do it.
I have
So many
been
of them.
I've been most amazed through the years, not at women who walk away,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been most amazed at what women are willing to work through if
Mm-hmm.
they have just even a glimmer of hope that their husband is trying to do his own recovery. I tell my
Yeah.
guys all the time that the rare exception is the wife who says, "Okay, now that I know that, I'm out of here."
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah.
vast majority of wives
Mm-hmm.
is, "Okay, now that I know that, that hurts. It's
Right.
horrible. I don't know how I can stay. I don't think I can stay."
Mm-hmm.
And yet, by the grace of God, if the husband's doing his recovery, most of the time the wife finds strength, finds grace from God in ways that I don't fully fathom much of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and stays.
Yeah. And some of the stories that I've heard, I understand why some of them do leave as well. But
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, if I went through what they went through, I don't know that I would be able to. But so I just want to say, yeah, I can relate to that. But it is it's remarkable to see some of those reconciliations. It's fantastic.
Sure.